Hiber-Nation 4. Grizzly's Growls presents Stories of the Hiber-Nation. The following stories are either from the public domain or read by permission of the author, who retains all rights. In either case, I'm reading these stories because I like to read stories. And, well, that's it. I hope you enjoy listening. Pull up a chair. The Biography of a Grizzly by Ernest Thompson Seton, as read by David Grizzly Smith. Part 2. The Days of His Strength. Chapter 1. Wahb's third summer had brought him the stature of a large-sized bear, though not nearly the bulk and power that in time were his. He was a very light-colored now, and this was why Spawat, a Shoshone Indian who more than once hunted him, called him the white bear, or Wahb. Now, Spawat was a good hunter, and as soon as he saw the rubbing tree on the upper Meeteetse, he knew he was on the range of a big grizzly. He bushwhacked the whole valley, spent many days before he found a chance to shoot, and then Wahb got a stinging flesh wound in the shoulder. Well, he growled horribly, but seemed to take the fight out of him. He scrambled up the valley and over the lower hills till he reached a quiet haunt where he lay down. His knowledge of healing was wholly instinctive. He licked the wound and all around it and sought to be quiet. The licking removed the dirt, and by massage removed the inflammation, and it plastered the hair down as a sort of a dressing over the wound to keep out the air, dirt, and microbes. There could be no better treatment. But the Indian was on his trail, and before long the smell warned Wahb that a foe was coming, so he quietly climbed farther up the mountain to another resting place. But again he sensed the Indian's approach and made off. Well, several times this happened, and at length there was a second shot and another galling wound. Wahb was furious now. There was nothing that really frightened him but that horrible odor of man and iron and guns that he remembered from the day he lost his mother. But now all fear of those left him. He heaved painfully up the mountain again and along under a 6-foot ledge, and then up and back to the top of the bank where he lay flat. On came the Indian, armed with a knife and a gun, deftly, swiftly keeping on the trail, gloating joyfully over each bloody print that meant such anguish to the hunted bear. Straight up the side of broken rock he came, where Wahb, ferocious with pain, was waiting on the ledge. On sneaked the dogged hunter. His eyes still scanned the bloody slots or swept the woods ahead, but never was raised to glance above the ledge, and Wahb, as he saw this shape of death relentless on his track and smelled the hated smell, poised his bulk at heavy cost upon his quivering, mangled arm, and there held until the proper instant came. Then to his sound arm's matchless native force he added all the weight of desperate hate as down he struck one fearful, crushing blow. The Indian sank without a cry and then dropped out of sight. Wahb rose and sought again a quiet nook where he might nurse his wounds, and thus he learned that one must fight for peace, for he never saw that Indian again, and he had time to rest and recover. Chapter 2. The years went on as before, except that each winter Wahb slept less soundly, and each spring he came out earlier and was a bigger grizzly, with fewer enemies that dared face him. When his 6th year came, he was a big, strong, sullen bear with neither friendship nor love in his life, since that evil day on the Lower Piney. No one ever heard of Wahb's mate. No one believes he ever had one. A love season of bears came and went year after year, but left him alone in his prime as he had been in his youth. Now, it's not good for a bear to be alone. It is bad for him in every way. His habitual moroseness grew with his strength, and anyone chancing to meet him now would have called him a dangerous grizzly. He'd lived in the Meeteetse Valley since first he betook himself there, and his character had been shaped by many little adventures with traps and his wild rivals of the mountains, but there was none of the latter that he now feared, and he knew enough to avoid the first, for that penetrating odor of man and iron was a never-failing warning, especially after an experience which befell him in his 6th year. Was ever reliable nose told him that there was a dead elk down among the timber. Went up the wind, and there, sure enough, was the great delicious carcass, already torn open at the very best place. Now, true, there was that terrible man and iron taint, but it was so slight, and the feast was so tempting that after circling around and inspecting the carcass for his 8 feet of stature as he stood erect, he went cautiously forward and at once was caught by his left paw in an enormous bear trap. He roared with pain and slashed about in a fury, but this was no beaver trap. It was a big 40-pound bear catcher, and he was surely caught. Well, Wahb fairly foamed with rage and madly grit his teeth upon the trap. Well, then he remembered his forward experiences. He placed the trap between his hind legs with a hind paw on each spring and pressed down with all his weight. But it was not enough. He dragged off the trap and its clog and went clanking up the mountain. Again and again he tried to free his foot, but in vain, till he came to where a great trunk crossed the trail a few feet from the ground. By chance, or happy thought, he reared again under this and made a new attempt. With a hind foot on each spring and his mighty shoulders underneath the tree, he bore down with his titanic strength. The great steel springs gave way, the jaws relaxed, and he tore out his foot. So Wahb was free again, though he left behind a great toe, which had been nearly severed by the first snap of the steel. Again, Wahb had a painful wound to nurse, and he was a left-handed bear. That is, when he wished to turn over a rock, he stood on his right paw and turned with his left. One result of this disablement was to rob him for a time of all those dainty foods that are found under rocks or logs. The wound healed at last, but he never forgot that experience, and thenceforth the pungent smell of man and iron, even without the gun smell, never failed to enrage him. How many experiences had taught him it is better to run if he only smelled the hunter or heard him far away, but to fight desperately if the man was close at hand. The cowboys soon came to know that the upper Meeteetse was the range of a bear that was better left alone. Chapter 3. Now, one day, after a long absence, Wahb came into the lower part of his range and saw to his surprise one of the wooden dens that men make for themselves. Well, as he came around to get the wind, he sensed the taint that never failed to infuriate him now, and a moment later he heard a loud bang and felt a stinging shock in his left hind leg, the old stiff leg. He wheeled about in time to see a man running toward the new-made shanty. Had the shot been in his shoulder, Wahb would have been helpless, but it was not. Mighty arms that could toss pine logs like broomstick, paws that with one tap could crush the biggest bull on the range, claws that could tear huge slabs of rock from the mountainside. What was even a deadly rifle to them? And when the man's partner came home that night, he found him on the reddened shanty floor, the bloody trail from outside, and a shaky, scribbled note on the back of a paper novel told him the tale. "It was Wahb that done it. I seen him by the spring, and I wounded him. Tried to get on the shanty, but he kitched me. My God, how I suffer. Jack. That was all fair. I mean, the man had invaded the bear's country, had tried to take the bear's life, and had lost his own. But Jack's partner swore he would kill that bear. Took up the trail, followed it up the canyon, and there bushwhacked and hunted day after day, put out baits and traps, and at length one day he heard a crash, clatter, thump, and a huge rock bounded down a bank into a wood, scaring out a couple of deer that floated away like thistledown. Miller thought at first it was a landslide, but he soon knew it was Wahb that had rolled that boulder over merely for the sake of 2 or 3 ants beneath it. The wind had not betrayed him, so on peering through the bush, Miller saw the great bear as he fed, favoring his left hind leg and growling sullenly to himself at a fresh twinge of pain. Miller steadied himself and thought, well, here goes a finisher or a dead miss. Gave a sharp whistle, and the bear stopped every move. And as he stood with his ears acock, the man fired at his head. But at the moment the great shaggy head moved, only an infuriating scratch was given. Smoke betrayed the man's place, and the grizzly made savage 3-legged haste to catch his foe. Miller dropped the gun and swung lightly into a tree, the only large one near. Wahb raged in vain against the trunk. He tore off the bark with his teeth and claws, but Miller was safe beyond his reach. For fully 4 hours the grizzly watched, then gave it up. Slowly went off into the bushes till lost to view. Miller watched him from the tree, and afterward waited nearly an hour to be sure that bear was gone. He then slipped to the ground, got his gun, set out for camp. But Wahb was cunning. He had only seemed to go away, and then had sneaked back quietly to watch. And as soon as the man was away from the tree, too far to return, Wahb dashed after him. In spite of his wounds, the bear could move the faster. Within a quarter of a mile, well, Wahb did just what the man had sworn to do to him. Long afterward, his friends found the gun, and enough to tell the tale. The claim shanty on the Meeteetse fell to pieces. Never again was used, for no man cared to enter a country that had but few allurements to offset its evident curse of ill luck, and where such a terrible grizzly was always on the warpath. Thanks for listening to Stories from the Hiber-Nation. Comment on the website at grizzly.libsyn.com. This program is sponsored by donations from people like you and is released with a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.